Welcome back to iGen Politics, the podcast that makes politics engaging and relevant for all generations. This is Victor Shi.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, and today's Jill's pin is a donkey and an elephant with boxing gloves on, because our guest today is going to talk a lot about campaigns and the fight that has to go on during them.
We are coming to you exactly 1 week away from two very big local elections. The first is the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, which will impact things like the future of voting and abortion rights in Wisconsin. And the second is the mayoral election in my and Jill's hometown, Chicago. Today, we are excited to talk about the importance of both of those elections, as well as look ahead to 2024 and how Democrats and the media should be talking about Republicans.
Joining us today is a veteran of many presidential, state, and local campaigns, including John Edwards, Doug Jones, Howard Dean, Ted Kennedy, and many, many more. Currently, Joe Trippi is an advisor to the Lincoln Project and hosts that Trippi Show podcast. He is also managing the campaign of Paul Vallis, who we are going to be talking about today, as I'm particularly interested in what's going on in that race as a Chicago resident, who is one of, Paul is one of the two finalists in a runoff election, which is going to be held next week. Joe, it's great to have you with us today. We're very excited to be talking about all of these things.
Great to be with you guys.
So let's start off by talking about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court election. First, give us a broad overview. Why should we be paying attention to that race?
Because it's going to decide a whole lot. This is one of those where elections have consequences. We've already seen what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court and the consequence of Trump being able to make those appointments. In Wisconsin, it's an elected position, and this is it could be a deciding vote on everything. The things that we've all been looking at, from all the efforts to after Dobbs to take away and restrict or deny a woman's abortion rights, guns. Everything, every decision that could be made by the Supreme Court of Wisconsin is going to come down to whether the Democrat progressive person wins a seat.
It's really important. And of course, a lot of people from Illinois are heading to Wisconsin to help in getting out the vote for this. But the courts have been something Democrats haven't really focused on as much as the Republicans have. Is that starting to change? What are your thoughts? Ben Winkler has been doing a great job. He's been a guest on this show talking about this particular race. But what is the message that's going to resonate to get out the vote?
Well, first of all, he's going to be on that Trippi show this week as well. So
he's terrific.
We're looking at the same. This is very, very important election. Look, Democrats have and progressives, I think, didn't pay attention to a lot of things. Local legislative elections, we didn't pay attention to. As Republicans really focused on winning local legislature seats. The same with these elected judgeships around the country. I think you're right that there's been more of a focus now. In fact, that the fact that we're even talking about this may be the first year where there was actually we're podcasts. We're talking about the importance of a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. But yes, I think anybody who's got the ability to get to help in Wisconsin, to help with the Democratic Party there in terms of what they need to make sure the vote gets out, those kinds of things, really important. And if you're away and can make phone calls or sign up through the union, we have jointheunion.us, which encourages people to connect locally wherever they are to make an impact. Wisconsin, this Supreme Court race may well be the one of the more critical races in that state in some time, given the impact it could have on the future.
And we'll put the links in our show notes so that our audience can help out in this very important race.
Sure.
So let's turn to
Absolutely.
the Chicago mayoral election. You managed Paul Vallis's campaign.
I'm
Talk to us.
the strategist. I'm not the
Okay.
day-to-day
Well,
manager.
that's
Not
even
not
more
the campaign
important.
manager.
I'm
Okay.
too old to
Okay.
do that.
Right. Let's talk about the strategy, because that is really crucial. You have in Chicago a real Democratic division between a very liberal, progressive candidate and a conservative Paul Vallis. You have someone who has the support of the uh, police union and someone who has the support of the teachers union, and it's really been quite a difficult choice for Chicagoans to choose between the two visions being offered. And Vallis is doing a very heavy push on crime, but can you talk about his strategy and what he would be like as mayor?
Yeah, I mean, look, Paul Vallis is more of a Joe Biden, Dick Durbin Democrat. He's not a, he where he's not a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren Democrat. And so, that division's been going on in the party for quite some time. And again, I think you're right. I mean, I think right now the race is going to be very, very close. People are out organizing, knocking on doors right now, and I'm not, I'm not here to kind of promote my candidates. I mean, that's not, I love to answer any of your questions about what's going on. But look, that race is going to be tight. It's going to be my guess would be decided by less than a point or two in the end. And I also think that, from Paul's point of view, yeah, let me give you a couple of examples of like why this whole, the conservative, it's not he's not a conservative Democrat. He really is a Joe Biden, Dick Durbin kind of Democrat. I mean, when let me give you an example. He ran as a Democrat against Blagojevich in 2001, I think it was. And at the time, just getting to know him, at the time, he ran and publicly supported gay marriage. Now, this is 2001. Just to give everybody, a little sampling here. In 2003, I ran Howard Dean's campaign for president. Got to be one of the more progressive candidates that ran, and we were for domestic partnerships, which the majority of the Democratic Party thought might be disqualifying, going too far on gay rights. Well, Paul Vallis was way out ahead of Howard Dean, like 3 years ahead of him on gay marriage, 10 to 11 years before Joe Biden or Barack Obama came out for gay marriage. So this, what I'm trying to say is on issue after issue, if you really look at it, on who's going to defend a woman's right to choose and make Chicago a safe haven for women whose abortion rights are denied in other states, Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson have the same exact position. Right. Same on gay marriage or any of those kinds of issues. There is a difference. Chicago is down 1,700 police officers from where it should be. Paul Vallis thinks that we should take it up to the 1,700, fill that short number of officers, and at the same time hold the police accountable, institute reforms. Frankly, the agreement that he helped negotiate between the police and the city, he was responsible for drafting the accountability measures in there that the police union agreed to. And so what I'm saying is there is this difference of opinion. I mean, Brandon wants to cut the police department by $150 million is his plan, and it's very simple. Paul Vallas doesn't think this is a time to cut funding to the police department. He does think there's time. Everybody, I don't think anybody does who doesn't think that we have to hold the police department accountable, have reform, et cetera, et cetera. But in the meantime, right now, with the crime crisis that's happening in Chicago, it's kind of like you got to do both, not one or the other. Right. And we can have an argument about that, but look, in the end, that race will be everybody's going to fight for every single vote, because it will come down to that, I think, in the end.
I agree. Yeah. And I did not mean to suggest, if I use the word conservative, it's only in contrast to the progressiveness of Brandon Johnson. So
yeah,
it wasn't
that's what I mean.
Suggest in any way that he was conservative.
Yeah.
And I would agree, he is a moderate Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, it's more a Joe Biden, Bernie kind of divide in the party,
right.
Where they are, than anything else.
Right.
I mean, I think it's going to be, like you said, I mean, it's going to be, like you said, a very, very close race. And I know there's been some criticisms of Paul Vallas, including questions over how he led schools in Philadelphia and some other Twitter likes. But one of the things that I got a lot of questions about, at least from the primary, was just how low the turnout rate was among young people. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of calculus that's going into the campaign about how to reach young people in Chicago, or why young Chicagoans are just turning out at such a low rate, and kind of what Paul Vallas would offer students or young people.
Well, I think, look, the problem with youth turnout is writ large. I mean, forget whether, what wing of the party you're in, or any of those things. And I think some of it is self-fulfilling. And I mean by that is, there's a younger voters don't vote, therefore campaigns don't spend any money talking to younger voters. They may talk about the issue. I mean, obviously both Brandon and Paul have tried to communicate with younger voters. I mean, on the stump, or have policy positions. But I'm saying that one of the things that happens is you look at who's going to vote, and if in most, particularly municipal elections, off-year kind of elections, you look at the data, and it's all old, people over 65 are the biggest part of the electorate, and the smallest part are 18 to 30, 18 to 25. The problem with that, Victor, and I know you've been working on this like crazy out there, but the problem with that is that, I mean, I'm not talking about Paul or Brandon. I'm talking about just as a campaign manager. The problem with that is, okay, you've got $2,000 to spend. Are you going to spend it talking to the 65-year-olds who are the big piece of the electorate, or take time and money to speak to a group that hasn't been voting? Now, that hasn't been voting. What I would say is that's changing. It's changing a lot. I think gun violence in particular is climate change. I mean, there's a number of different issues that are starting to really energize and engage and get more of the younger, Gen Z and others to actually get involved in politics and make a difference. And you're seeing a lot of them now, like yourself, I think, which is why I like retweet everything you put out there, because I think we as a party have to do a much better job of engaging in with the younger generation, and empowering them to have a real say. And I also think that the divide right now between sort of Trumpism and the Democratic Party is, what you're seeing, a lot of people who don't buy into the racism and the homophobia, and particularly younger voters, that right now is a big opportunity that I see. One of the things of being as old as I am is that I've seen a few things. And one of the things that this really reminds me, the moment reminds me of when Ronald Reagan emerged in the early 80s, and how, given where the Democratic Party was at the time, we were way out ahead on the progressive side. And I think most Americans felt we had gone too far and were out of step. And that brings Reagan in. But worse, we lost an entire generation of young people who were enamored with Reagan, joined the Republican Party. And that generation that was coming of age, 18, 20, 24, 25-year-olds in the Reagan era, became Republicans for the rest of their lives. And frankly, a lot of them now are the MAGA people that Reagan wouldn't be part of their party, right? But, that's a different story. My point is, I think right now that same possibility is there, in the opposite direction. I believe that the Republican Party under Trump is becoming anathema to the young generation, and it's now a huge opportunity for Democrats to speak to that generation, empower it, engage with it, your generation, Victor, and on gun violence, on climate change, on the issues that frankly, they're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest if we fail. And so I think there's a chance right now that the Republican Party is on the verge of losing your generation forever, like what happened to a lot of to the Democratic Party during the Reagan era. And I might point out, I was a crazy progressive back in late 70s and early 80s. Not that I'm not now, but you learn a few things. That we know we're right, and we want it our way now. Okay, that's great. That's how I was it was back then. It turns out you can move way too fast for this country and end up 12 years in the wilderness, like we did with Ronald Reagan for 2 terms and George Herbert Walker Bush for a term. That's where I see the Republicans going now. But at the same time, I think that's part of this fight between sort of I think Biden gets that right now. People want calm, steady leadership in the right direction. I know a lot of progressives want bold, exciting, but I think Biden has got it right in terms of where the country really is right now and what the opportunity will be to accomplish the things we want on climate change and other things as we get more traction with your generation.
So before we move more into the national 2024 elections, I just want to follow up a little bit more on the Chicago race, because Victor and I are Chicagoans and care a lot. One of the biggest criticisms of Paul Vallas has been his criticism about how he's managed schools, both in Chicago, Philadelphia, New Orleans, leaving devastation in his wake, is what the critics say. Can you give us some response to that? He has been endorsed by. I was head of career and technical education under Arne Duncan for the Chicago Public Schools, and he has endorsed Paul Vallas on the law enforcement side because he feels that that's the critical issue. But education's a pretty important thing too. And
well, Arne was the Obama's Secretary of Education,
yes, of course.
So he knows Paul. He knows Paul's skill set on the education side of things.
He didn't address that in his op-ed supporting him, but I'm asking you, as someone who knows him, to talk about it. I have not heard any responses.
First of all, one of the reasons is the main focus of, the number one top issue in the race, bar none, no matter who you are, and no matter what community you come from in Chicago is crime. I mean,
I get that, but I'm saying
right. So
in the same way that we can do two things at once.
I'm talking about why Arnie Duncan talked more in his press conference about Paul's crime stuff than education. I'm not trying to skirt your question. I would just say that one, Bill Clinton in the State of the Union address literally called on the country to follow what had been accomplished under Paul Vallis's leadership as Chicago Public Schools. It's 1999 State of the Union address in which he urged the country to follow what Paul was doing at the time, or what Chicago schools were doing as Paul was leading them. He left Chicago schools with basically teachers got pay raises. The pension fund was fully funded over 100% when he left. People say, well, after he left, blah blah blah. Well, after he left, if somebody screwed up the budget and didn't do it right and didn't put money back in, that's not Paul Vallis. You can say, look at what happened after Paul left. That's all BS as far as I'm concerned. Hurricane Katrina wipes out New Orleans schools. There were no schools. Some of these were like nearly impossible situations. Okay, there's no schools. What are you going to do? He stood up like 10,000 classroom, rooms for 10,000 students right away. Jury rigged a system, to get people, children back in the classroom. By the way, it's very similar to now. We had those kids in Katrina went for a long time without being in a classroom. And by the way, didn't have Zoom learning or any of that stuff, right? I mean, back when that happened. And then people go, well, look at what he did. I mean, there's a reason why after he did what he did at Chicago public schools, that when the New Orleans schools were blown out, he was chosen. He was asked to come there. When Haiti was whacked by an earthquake, who did they call on to come down there and work on getting children back in schools? Paul Vallis. Chile, earthquake, Paul Vallis. Philadelphia, yeah, okay. And then everybody's going to complain about what he did to fix the school system that was so broken. They called in Paul Vallis. I mean, I understand why the teachers union, is supporting their lobbyist. Okay, and we can all get into whether the lobbyist should be then doing, the budget agreements and the contracts with the teachers union that he's a lobbyist for. But so I understand why they are pushing this line. But a lot of this it's like the same thing. It's like, oh, he's not a Democrat. Yeah, well, Joe Biden's a Democrat. It's all, it's easy to do. That's one of the problems you have in today's politics, is it's very easy to just make basically make the attack. And it's hard to I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time or money pushing back on attacks on a place right now where people aren't focused. Right now, they're focused on crime and the safety of their neighborhoods. And it's not a hard thing. There's 1,700 fewer police than there should be. I don't know what will happen if Brandon is elected mayor. Do more officers leave? I have no idea how that'll play out. Or the same for Paul, by the way. I mean, it's not that. I'm just saying, but these are issues that people really need to think about before they cast their vote.
Absolutely. Well, these state and local elections are so critical, but let's shift to 2024 because it's shaping up to be a very interesting race. And I want to start on the Republican side. And I think it'd be remiss if we didn't mention Trump's rally in Waco over this past weekend. I'm wondering if you watched and what were your reactions to what we saw and kind of just to kind of top lines?
God, it's going to get worse, by the way. I
Yeah.
mean, the one thing I've been saying now is nationally, one of the problems we still have is that people still think this is the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. It's a right-left thing. It's not a right-left thing. It is full-blown authoritarian, mean, fascist movement versus democracy. And the problem with that, look, when a party, we talked about this at the top, when a party moves too far left or right and goes to the extreme, it loses. And it can lose badly, and it can lose the whole thing for decades. For, like I said, Reagan, Bush, right? What's happening now is not a move to harder right conservatism. It's a move to the extreme on hate, anger, resentment, retribution, fascism, and that is a different. So will it be rejected? I believe it will be by the American people. The problem is that it's going to get darker in that direction. DeSantis and Trump will keep moving further and further down the doom drain, and be more than willing to take the country with them. The problem with that is, when progressives are wiped out for 3 elections in a row, we kind of become more pragmatic. We think about things a little bit different. We alter our the way our rhetoric. The same with the conservatives, Goldwater, etc. This will be far different because it is a call to violence, and that call will get darker and darker. And when they lose, it's not just, oh, we lost an election for 2 or 3. No, this is when they lose. The results, I think, are not going to be good for the country in terms of the violence that will have been fueled. And it's astonishing, not astonishing, but just again, just another glimpse into how dark the party's become, that very few people have stood up within the party to call it out, and won't. I think
it's appalling that no one has called this out, and it is hard to imagine. You said that it was going to get worse than Waco, and all I can think of is Trump standing with his hand on his heart as the January 6th choir sings. And I mean, it's so appalling. And it's so appalling that there are thousands and millions even of people who actually believe everything he's saying. So it's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we want to talk to you about is how the media can help. How should the media cover Trump right now? What lessons should they have learned from his last 2 campaigns, and what's coming for a third? Should they cover his rallies at all? Should they have flashcards that come up saying lie, alternate fact? What can be done to get facts across to anyone who's paying attention to the media?
Like I said, I think the big problem is the media still sees this as Republican versus Democrat. You see CNN trying to do the both sides thing, invite more, Esper and more Republicans from the Trump administration are now are now on the panels in a way that treats the parties as there's still two pro-democracy parties, and there are not 2 pro-democracy parties. The press needs to understand that the freedom of the press, that all the different things that democracy and our Constitution are at stake right now, and they need to treat it that way and report it that way. It's not. There's two sides to the story. One, I put it this way: there's a difference between being objective and reporting the truth, and being subjectively trying to say, "Hey, look, we've talked to both sides here, and you decide what's true." That's where they are. They are stuck there. And by the way, I'm not sure they'll get out. That's why we started Resolute Square with my friends at the Lincoln Project to try to start, and why I think your podcast and others that are out there are important, because they're not going to do the both sides. We're going to report or amplify what's true, take on the Trump lies and everything else that's going on out there from the disinformation that Fox News and everybody puts out. And that's the other problem. The other problem is that, look, Fox News, Newsmax, Breitbart, Alex Jones, all of it. They invested billions of dollars and 20, 30 years at least to build that outrage machine that doesn't deal with facts or anything. It just creates another outrage, another way to go after them, whoever the new them is. And they're going to keep doing that. And the no one on our side of, on the pro-democracy side, spent a dime building the opposite. I mean, we don't have Jeff Bezos is not. He may have bought the Washington Post, but he's not saying, "Here, Victor, Jill, Joe, here's a few $1 million to start a platform that takes on the disinformation and the outrage machines and exposes the lies." And so, yeah, you're doing it. We're doing. I mean, different entity. The Bulwark. I mean, there's all kinds of Pod Save America. I mean, it's all happening in a way that's totally different from the way. I mean, they have $1 billion. They have billionaires they just go to and say, hey, write a big check so we can go attack trans people, or whatever they decide they're going to go after next.
I think you're right. I do want to say, and of course I'm biased because I am an MSNBC contributor, but I do see the pushback on MSNBC. When I hear anchors reporting, they will always say, "Without a shred of evidence, so-and-so said." So they are putting it in context and helping. The problem is two-part. One is, how should Democrats be handling this, and what should they be saying? But two is, how do you reach the audience that only tunes in to Fox, Breitbart, etc.? That's the important thing. If they didn't, for example, Fox isn't covering the fact that their emails show they knowingly lied to their audience and that they have no respect for their audience, or for that matter, for their guests. That's not being reported. So the people who watch Fox still believe Fox tells the truth. How do you get those people to be aware? There is some diminution in believing the election is stolen as this information has come out, but it's not enough. So what's the answer there?
The first part of that is that it's not. I don't blame MSNBC. I mean, it's not about a channel. It's just not what media was, what journalists were taught, right? They've grown up, and so they're not going. I think they should be much stronger in exposing the authoritarian side of what's happened, and not dance around it, in the fascist side. Democrats, our problem is, look, the problem with an authoritarian party is that everything is there's no real merit to anything, or you got great ideas. It's proximity to dear leader. And so dear leader decides what we're talking about, and everybody in the party immediately mimics and says what dear leader wants. That's how an authoritarian. It's a vertical constructed party, and it's got plenty of vertical media outlets like Fox. Everybody knows, hey, go there, see what the line of the day is, and repeat it. Democrats and progressives have a different problem. We're not a vertical party. We're horizontal. We have several different leaders geographically within different groups. And, if Joe Biden said to all of us tomorrow morning, you need to go out and say this is the party line, we'd all say bullshit.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. That's not how we'll have Bernie will say something. I mean, people will, we have this debate within the party. And because of that, you'll never get the same kind of discipline at attacking what they are now. I mean, what that party's become. And by the way, they weren't always this way. I mean, they had wings too, and and debates within their party about policy. No, now look, their platform is whatever Trump says their platform is. I mean, this is how obvious this has become. That they are a vertical party that reveres the top, and things come down from the top down, and everybody gets in lockstep. That is pretty close to how some really bad things happened in the 1930s and et cetera. The party's getting deeper and deeper into that dark stuff, right? The Democratic, the other part of the Democratic Party doesn't really realize, not everybody in the party, just like there's not everybody in the Republican Party, recognizes this threat. Not everybody in the press recognizes what the threat is. So you now have people who kind of like have some questions about where this authoritarian movement in the Republican Party go. But I've seen the focus groups where they sit there and go, but I've been a Republican my entire life. I can't possibly vote for and then they spit out the word Democrat like it's poison, right? So because it's a conditioned, it's been 250 years or a long time of this conditioning that there's two parties. They're both, want what's best for the country. No, that's not true. One's now anti-democratic, and so to get to where Democrats are, I think we as a whole, I mean, I don't remember when we, part of the whole thing was like, you couldn't even get Democrats to say he was lying. I mean, no one would use the lie word, right? I mean, I'm talking about years ago now, but what I'm saying is, like, no, we have to start calling this out for what it is, and not get let up on them, because part of what they also do is exhaust you. It's like, new outrage, exhaust you, create another outrage, exhaust you, and people start tuning out. And that's how authoritarians end up. That's how democracy dies eventually. Almost always, it's not because there was no fight. It was everybody just got so exhausted. And when they woke up one day, the authoritarians were in charge. That's what Trump. And look, the other problem here, and this is just the truth, Donald Trump, there's only one way out for him. It's not to do a plea deal. It's not to cut some deal for a pardon. There's only one freaking way out for Donald Trump, and that's to win. He knows that if he's president, he'll pardon himself. He will run the world. I mean, in Donald Trump's head, right? He will be in charge of everything. Katie, bar the door. I will get retribution. He means that. I will get revenge. I will be your retribution. And he won't worry one whit about the American legal system. He got him through the first 4 years. It'll get him through the next. So he is going to be massively driven. All this talk about, maybe he won't. No, he will destroy DeSantis and anything that gets in his way in their party, because you're already seeing Nikki Haley and Scott join the dark side. I mean, really go dark on the retribution and the other stuff that he's pushing right now.
Well, we may
It's
not be
an absolute
communicating it, but at least anybody listening today is going to realize that we are now the Democratic Party and a fascist
and yeah,
authoritarian MAGA
Yeah.
party. And
yeah.
there may be some independents and some former Republicans who can't join the Democrats, but who cannot continue to support
Yeah.
what is the loss of our entire country. So,
And I think more than ever before in 2024, I mean, it's going to be the choice that matters. It's not a referendum; it's a choice, and the contrast couldn't be clearer. But I do want to end on a bit of a hopefully lighter note, and for our younger listeners out there, which is you've managed many campaigns. You've been on many campaigns on the federal, state, local level. So first of all, I want to ask you, what is it like manage a campaign? And I mean, is the image of someone who gets no sleep, lives on coffee, gets takeout pizza at night ring true? And what advice do you have for young people who
Yeah.
might be thinking of a line of work in politics and on campaigns at high levels?
Well, I mean, first of all, yes, for me that rang true. Okay, I mean, I during the Dean campaign, I was getting like 2 hours of sleep a night.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I used to think that anybody who said they fell asleep on their feet, like, yeah, right, like how the hell does that happen? How can you be standing there, you know? And one morning, I went down to get a cup of coffee after having no sleep at the coffee shop in the basement of the headquarters, you know, in the same building. And I went down and I was ordering a cup of coffee, and the realization that you literally can fall asleep on your feet hit me just as I hit the ground and broke every rib on my left side. Because
Oh,
what happens
oh
when you
gosh.
what happens when you fall asleep on your feet, it turns out you
Right.
you're
You just collapse.
yeah, you just collapse, and there is no like defensive, like, you know, stop your fall or
Oh,
anything.
wow.
You're hitting like a rag doll. And so, no, yeah, this is all true. I'll tell you the thing I say to everybody, young person. Every young person out there should immediately, one, get involved in 2024 in a race. I mean, whether it's congressional, Senate, where you think you can make a difference, but somewhere in when you're young, work in a presidential campaign, and I guarantee you that, one, you'll make a huge difference. Two, you will say at the end of it, win or lose, you will say at the end of it, that was the greatest experience I've ever had in my life. And then I'm going to just one cautionary note for most of you who do it and say that was the greatest thing I've ever done. It was the best experience I've ever had in my life. The very next sentence out of your mouth will be, please God, don't let me ever do that again.
well,
And the reason is, yeah, none. And you're talking to a guy who said that and then 9 times or 8 times, right
Right,
back.
right.
But it is because of that. It takes the physical and mental
Yeah,
drain
yeah.
of a presidential campaign, the amount of pressure. It's one thing when you're like one of the 13 candidates out there, but
Yeah.
that pressure is okay. But then I was with Mondale when we got the nomination. Okay, that pressure goes up tenfold the day you get the nomination. Now the entire, not just the party, but the entire future of the country. Indeed, if you look at Trump and Biden and that, the world, I mean, the impact on the world is now sitting in that campaign apparatus that you're part of or leading. The amount of, that's what I'm saying, when with the amount each step of the way, every primary, each step of the way, the weight of that on your shoulders is incredible. And so at the end of it, you're like, God, that was the greatest experience I ever had. And you just throw that crap off of you and go, but please don't put that on me ever again. And so, like, but you see what the consequences are. I mean, when a Trump wins or a Biden wins, and yeah, there are lesser. I mean, the same thing with the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. I mean, in different ways. So, right, somewhere right now, there's a campaign manager in that race. Who knows? It's not just to win the race or lose the race. It's it's rulings here. I mean, things that are going to impact. Well, you know, it's one thing when if you're not the nominee to be the Supreme Court justice, right? But you are now. That's what I'm saying. It increases the higher up that level of the politics, and what the win or the loss in the race can mean to millions of people is a very humbling experience.
So one last question, even though you don't follow your own advice because you told yourself, don't let me do this again. And you did it again and again and again.
I'm Al Pacino. I keep thinking every time I think I got out, they pull me
back in.
But you were, when you were very young in this business, you were portrayed in a movie with Hugh Jackman, The Front Runner, about your role in the Gary Hart campaign, a campaign I remember very well, and I remember everything about it.
Unfortunately, I do too. Yes, okay.
And for those younger people who don't know who Gary Hart is or what monkey business means, look it up. And Victor probably does because he's a super knowledgeable political junkie. But anyway, how do you think you were portrayed in that movie? Did you like it? Was it fun to be portrayed in a film?
It was, yeah. I mean, all those things fun. I've learned a lot of lessons about how they have to use dramatic license and change what really happened, which is always disappointing to me. I mean, when because I think the real story of how I got the job of being Lee Hart, the wife's chief of staff, when it all hit the fan, it was probably would have been better than what they did. But it was, I thought the movie was an honest portrayal. As you can condense one hellish period of my life or anybody's life into a 2-hour thing, and Gary Hart's life for sure. It did a very good job, and it was fun going up to New York for the premiere and meeting the guy who played me, and Oliver Cooper and others. It was so, but it's been a weird, wild ride. I mean, I woke up one day, I was like sitting at home on a Saturday night, and it's the cold open on Saturday Night Live is Fred Amerson playing me, and somebody playing Greta Van Susteren. I mean, it was and I had no idea, right? Seth Meyers wrote the cold open, and so that was the only day. There's only been 2 days that my kids thought I was cool. That was one. They saw Saturday Night Live. That's got to be, that's how.
Absolutely.
And I'm still trying to remember what the second time they thought I was cool what was, but I'll
check in and let us know.
I will.
I had that same experience when I was seeing Michael Moore's movie Fahrenheit 9/11, and just in the audience watching it, and all of a sudden I'm on the screen.
Yeah, that's what it was. One of those kind of moments.
Whoa! I didn't know. They didn't ask me permission. But it was just a clip of me doing commentary on MSNBC. It's quite shocking. I hope my movie of my memoir doesn't get taken away from the facts, but I do have some script approval rights, so maybe it won't.
I can tell you nightmare stories.
This has been fascinating, and we thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
No,
yes,
thank
Joe,
you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. It was great being on with you.
Thanks so much. Bye, Joe.
Bye.
Lights on. Oh. Be right back.
Yeah, sounds good. So Jill's going to go turn on her lights so she has better lighting, but I'll take it for the meantime. That was a fun episode with Joe Trippi, who has just so many stories to tell about his time on campaigns, on federal, state, local, and now with the Paul Vallas campaign in Chicago. And there's a lot of news that we want to talk about today, including the first piece of news, which is right before we went live, we heard that a federal judge has ordered, or not federal judge, but Dominion basically wants a bunch of Fox executives as well as Fox anchors to testify in their trial in their $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit. So whenever that is, some of the people who are included in that list include people like Sean Hannity, Jay Wallace, who is a Fox exec, Tucker Carlson, Maria Bartiromo, Bartiromo, yeah, Jill, Bartiromo, yes, Brett Baier, Chris Starwell, Abby Grossberg, who is that producer who filed a new lawsuit against Fox. So there's a lot of people who they want to bring in. Jill, I mean, this could be, I think, a really big moment for the country to hear directly from Tucker Carlson and Fox executives just what they did, and could maybe change the playing field, I think. What do you think?
Well, I hope that this will be a trial that is there are cameras allowed and it's live broadcast, because of course I get my popcorn and sit there watching every second of it. I think the emails and text messages were pretty darn dramatic, but hearing it live would be pretty dramatic too. It will be really important, and I think that Dominion, which should be able to settle this in a second, because the culpability is so clear to me that it's bad business for Fox to let this go any further and be any more public. But I think Dominion doesn't want to settle, because they have all of this great testimony. So I think it's really important. When you mentioned a federal judge, I think you were referring to Mike Pence, once again, the courts have said, no, you can't use executive privilege to get out of testifying to criminal behavior. But
do you think his appeal will work?
Well, first of all, let me just say the instructions to him by the judge were he can use some legislative privilege claim. So no executive privilege. And we know why there's no executive privilege. One, because only the incumbent president can exert it. And President Biden has said, no, this is too important, he wouldn't, but also because there's a crime fraud exception. And when you're about to engage in crimes, that testimony comes in over executive privilege. And that was Trump's argument against Pence testifying. Pence was using the speech and debate clause, saying that he was no longer the executive branch member. He was actually a part of the Senate because he was serving as the Senate president. So it's unclear I haven't seen the exact ruling because it did just come down. But from the language, it's not clear exactly how broad the exception will be, whether it will be for only his conduct on January 6th, or whether it will include advice he was given about January 6th. You know, what conversations did he have with the president that said, here's what you have to do on January 6th, or his conversations with Eastman, or so I'm waiting to see how it plays out. But whatever the breadth is, it's not going to be broad enough to protect the interesting information that I think will be extremely harmful to President Trump, former President Trump. So I think that'll be interesting. And then, of course, we have this week tons of other things to talk about, which are we're waiting for indictments. The focus seems to be exclusively on New York.
Only on New York.
And only on DA Bragg. Well, what about Georgia? What about the January 6th case in Special Counsel Smith's investigation? What about the Mar-a-Lago documents, the classified documents case? Those are pretty interesting. What about E. Jean Carroll, whose case is going to goes to trial next month? So
the amazing part about all of this is, the only reason why we're focused on this is because of that one Trump post on Truth Social saying that he would be arrested on last Tuesday. It's amazing and honestly a little bit sad that we're still falling for his post. We should not trust anything this man says. He's lied. I think the Washington Post said 30,000 times during his time in office. We can't trust what comes out of his mouth, and we can't more. Yeah, exactly. But what he posts on Truth Social, it drove the narrative, and it continues to drive the narrative. That's all that the media and people on Twitter are talking about. Manhattan DA Bragg, but I totally agree with you, and it's just stunning to me that he's able to write something on Truth Social and still people pay attention to it and let it drive the narrative when it should not. He should have no sway over the narrative. It's really bad that he can drive the narrative, because not only has it diverted our attention from these other very serious crimes that he's alleged to have committed and that he's being investigated for, but it keeps him
in the news while diverting
Yep.
us from the
Yep.
other things that we should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And it also creates an expectation that leads to disappointment, because no matter
Right.
what
Right.
happens, if he
They
decides
feel like the
not
justice
to,
system has
it's
failed.
really, if
Yeah.
that is, if he, Bragg, decides
Right.
not to indict, well, then it's a really big disappointment. If
Yeah.
he does
Yeah.
decide to, it's a, oh, so what? That's what we were expecting anyway. Why did it take so long? So I think it's
Right.
really bad. And this goes back to what we talked to Trippi about, to Joe Trippi about, which is, how should the press be covering all of this
Right.
to
And
avoid
wasn't that
creating these expectations?
right? And wasn't that a big mistake during 2016 and 2020 that basically, and throughout the Trump administration, which is that every single tweet that Trump said drove the headlines for hours, days, and it's like, we're at a time where this should not be. He's on Truth Social for a reason, and it's a
Yes.
failed social media platform, and we should not be treating him like he is the president. And like, I mean, yes, his words, I guess, have consequences, but it should not be. It should not be doing. The media, I think, has to spend a little bit less time covering what he posts on Truth Social.
Well, and law enforcement has to pay specific attention to it, because when
That's
he
true.
posts
Yeah.
something of a picture of him with a baseball bat next to the
Yeah.
head
Yeah.
of Alvin Bragg, that is a direct threat to me.
Yeah. And
When
that
he
was so
says
bad
death
that
and destruction, when he says go out
right.
and protest
Right.
to save our country, we know what
Yep.
happened
Yep.
in January 6th. Thank heaven, so far, his audience has not taken him up on it. But even Waco didn't end up in a mass
Yeah. Yeah.
devastating event, but it's always possible. And we have
Well,
past
and
experience. So law
there's
enforcement should be
chilling
watching.
there's a chilling thread, and hopefully we might be able to get her on this podcast. But Kathleen Bellow, who studies white nationalism and white rage, she's currently a professor at Northwestern. Actually, she's a history professor. Previously, was at U Chicago. She had this great thread on Twitter right after the Waco rally and said, "We aren't talking enough about just the significance of Waco and how, just like Trippi said, this is only going to get worse, and this is
Yeah.
going to unleash something that I don't think any of us are quite prepared for." And it wasn't like it was a crowd size of just a couple thousand. There were 15,000 people there who traveled all across the country to Waco, Texas. I mean, that's like, it's not a very popular area, and so
It
it's
is
really
near
dangerous.
very big cities, though. It is near
Oh, it's
Dallas and Houston and
yeah,
stuff. So
yeah,
it is convenient, but you're right. The fact that that many people came, it's small compared to what I'm sure he was hoping for.
yeah,
And you mentioned Waco, and I can't leave that without saying that um, one of my sisters-in-laws from the hashtag Sisters-in-Law Politicon podcast um,
yeah,
had a Substack article based on her experience
yeah, yeah,
in Waco, and I think everyone should read that. Maybe we'll put that show note,
yeah.
or that link in our show note.
And you're
And we
talking about
talked
Joyce
about
Vance,
it.
right?
Yes, Joyce Vance, and we did discuss it on the last episode of hashtag Sisters-in-Law, because Waco is a symbol, and it isn't a
Yeah,
coincidence that he picked it
no.
as a place
As
to
the
hold his rally.
first campaign rally of
Right,
2024,
right.
that's even more significant. Well, this is we're approaching the end of time, but thank you everyone for watching and listening to this episode of iGen Politics. We'll see whether or not this week is indictment week, but like Jill said, there are many that we should be paying attention to, including Georgia, E. Jean Carroll, Letitia James, January 6th, Mar-a-Lago. I mean, there's no shortage of investigations into Trump right now, and it's moving at a very fast pace. We had some Mike Pence today. There's some other stuff regarding Evan Corcoran testifying, Trump's lawyer. So lots of news. We'll be back next Tuesday for another episode of iGen Politics. Be sure to like and subscribe to youtube.com/politicon so you don't miss our live episodes. And if you don't watch on YouTube, you can also watch or listen wherever you follow your podcast, whether it's Apple or if you're like Jill, Google or Spotify. You can use those apps as well and find us there at iGen Politics. So thank you all so much for watching or listening. We are grateful, and we will see you next week.
Have a nice weekend.